There is a staircase in the American Southwest that people have called a miracle for more than 100 years. It spirals up through a small Gothic chapel in Santa Fe, New Mexico. A narrow ribbon of polished wood that turns twice around a completely empty centre and climbs nearly 20 feet to a choir loft, with no central column holding it up. 33 steps, nothing down the middle, and, the story says, not a single iron nail in the whole structure. For generations, visitors have stood beneath it and asked the same question. How could anyone build this? But that is the wrong question. Because the staircase can be explained, engineers have explained it. The truly unsettling mystery of the Loretto Chapel staircase is not how it stands up. It is what happened to the man who built it. Because he was real. He had a name. And somewhere along the way, that name was erased so completely that the world decided the only thing left that could explain the staircase was a saint. This is the story of how a man disappeared from his own masterpiece. It begins with a group of nuns who crossed a continent. In 1852, the Sisters of Loretto travelled west from Kentucky to the remote frontier town of Santa Fe to open a school for girls. The journey nearly killed them. Cholera struck on the road, and their leader died along the way. But the survivors reached Santa Fe, adapted to a strange and distant land, and founded the first permanent school for girls in New Mexico. And in time, they wanted a chapel of their own. Not a plain room for prayer, but something beautiful in the soaring French Gothic style of the world many of them had come from. They spent years and a fortune, some $30,000, to raise a miniature Gothic chapel modelled on the great Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, every line of it designed to pull the eye upward toward heaven. It was finished in 1878, and it had one problem. High near the ceiling, nearly 20 feet up, they had built a choir loft, with no good way to reach it. The chapel was too narrow. An ordinary staircase would swallow the whole floor. A spiral stair with a thick central post would crowd the tiny space, and a ladder was nearly impossible to climb safely in long, heavy religious habits. The sisters, the story goes, could not find a single carpenter able to solve it. So they prayed. They made a novena, 9 days of prayer to St. Joseph, the patron saint of carpenters. And on the 9th day, the legend says, a stranger appeared at the chapel, an old man with a few simple tools. He asked to work alone. He asked for tubs of water to soak the wood, and then quietly he built the staircase. When it was done, he was gone. He left no name. He submitted no bill. He asked for no payment at all. The sisters searched the town for him. They asked at the inns. They found nothing. No one knew who he was. No one knew where he had gone. And so, over the years, a conclusion took shape among the faithful. A carpenter who appears right after a prayer to the patron saint of carpenters, who builds something that looks impossible, and who then vanishes with no name and no payment. Perhaps that carpenter had been St. Joseph himself. It is a beautiful story. Need, faith, and a miracle, all wound together into 33 steps of spiralling wood. There is only one problem with it. Someone knew his name. On the 5th of January, 1895, a newspaper called the Santa Fe New Mexican printed a death notice. It reported that a French woodworker had died, an expert in wood, and it stated plainly, as a matter of simple local fact, that this man had built the handsome staircase in the Loretto Chapel. It was not written as a rumour or a theory or a startling new discovery. It was written the way you write down something everybody already knows, which means that in 1895 in Santa Fe, the identity of the carpenter was not a mystery at all. Someone remembered him. Someone knew his trade and his connection to that chapel and thought it plain enough to put in his obituary. So both stories cannot be true. Either the newspaper was wrong, or the carpenter's name was known all along, and then somehow it disappeared. His name was François-Jean Rochat. He was born in 1843 in a small town in the mountains of southeastern France. Like so many immigrants of that century, he appears in the records only in fragments, but we know he came to New Mexico around 1880, drawn most likely into the network of French. Catholic priests, craftsmen and settlers around the church in Santa Fe, the same French Catholic world the Sisters of Loretto belonged to. Locally, people knew him by a nickname, Frenchie. The historian who pieced his story back together, Mary Jean Strawcook, reconstructed a likely timeline. Rochas arrives in Santa Fe in the autumn of 1880, begins the staircase that October, and finishes it in the spring of 1881, several years after the chapel itself was completed, which means the breathless sequence of the legend, the prayer answered overnight, almost certainly never happened that way. The loft may have sat waiting for years, until the French Catholic community finally found the right man for the job, and there is a paper trail. Faint, but real. An 1881 account book kept by the sisters records a payment, $150 tied to wood, and to a Mr. Rochas. It does not say for the chapel's staircase. It is suggestive, not certain, but it places his name and wood and the sisters' money on the same line in the very year the staircase was built. And then there are his tools, because we know exactly what François-Jean Rochat owned. After his death, his belongings were inventoried one by one, and they are not the tools of a rancher or a common labourer. They are the tools of a master, fine moulding planes, chisels and gouges, precise gauges and squares and trammel points, the specialised instruments used to lay out circles, arcs and curves. That is the toolkit of a man who could bend wood into a spiral. A man capable of exactly the kind of curved, precise, finished joinery the impossible staircase demanded. The tools do not prove he built it, but they answer the oldest objection to the whole story. Could an ordinary human being have made this? Yes. This man could have. He had the hands for it. And here is where the legend quietly comes apart, and something more interesting takes its place. Because the staircase does not actually break the laws of physics. The story says it has no support. That is not quite true. It has no central post. But the two curved wooden rails running up its edges, the inner one coiled tightly through the open middle, do the work a central column normally would. That tight inner curve acts like a compressed spring of wood. The steps lock the two sides together. The weight travels down through the curves into the floor. It is unusual. It is brilliant. But it does not violate a single rule of engineering. It uses gravity. It does not defy it. The other famous claims soften too. The graceful railing in today's photographs was added later. The original had none, and people who climbed it said it swayed and flexed beneath their feet. The no nails is real, but wooden pegs and fitted joints were standard, if demanding craftsmanship. And the wood from no known tree, the engineers cannot explain it. Those are not facts. They are exaggerations that grew, retelling by retelling, on television specials and tourist brochures, each version making the staircase a little more impossible, and the carpenter a little less human. But the strangest thing the legend got wrong is the ending, because François-Jean Rochat did not vanish after building the staircase. He lived for more than a decade. He left Santa Fe and went south into the wild country of the Tularosa Basin, near a place called Dog Canyon, and built a life there. He raised cattle and horses. He planted an orchard and a vineyard. He wrote letters, made plans, took pride in what he was carving out of that hard frontier. He was not a phantom who performed one miracle and evaporated. He was a man living an ordinary, difficult, hopeful life. And then, in the final days of December 1894, François-Jean Rochat was found dead near his ranch. He had been shot. His killing was never solved. It belonged to the violent world of the frontier, where disputes over land and water and cattle got men killed in lonely canyons and left no answers behind. There is nothing to tie his death to the staircase. But once you know both halves of the story, the image is impossible to shake. The man who built America's most famous miracle died alone, murdered in a desert canyon, his killer never found. And a few weeks later, a small newspaper printed the notice that would become almost the only thing tying his name to his masterpiece, before that name slipped away for good. Because that is the real mystery of the Loretto staircase. Not the wood, not the physics. The carpenter in the legend vanished the moment his work was done. The carpenter in the historical record vanished in a completely different way. He did not disappear from the world. He disappeared from the staircase. The thread connecting François-Jean Rochard to the thing he had built simply frayed and fell away. The sisters who knew him died. He had likely been hired quietly through the community, with no grand contract to survive him. His name was never written into the story the chapel told about itself. And an empty space is a powerful thing. Over the decades, the space where a man's name should have been slowly filled with something else, with prayer, with symbolism, with television and tourism and wonder, until it had grown large enough to hold a saint. So who built the staircase at Loretto Chapel? Almost certainly a French immigrant named François-Jean Rochard, a master craftsman who solved a hard problem with a skill that still stops people in their tracks, then rode off to build a ranch and die by a gun in a canyon far away. There is no contract, no diary, no receipt with the word staircase on it. But the newspaper, the tools, the ledger, the timing, and the man himself all point quietly and clearly in a single direction. And yet the miracle survives anyway, because a historian can tell you how the staircase stands, and a carpenter can tell you how the wood was bent, and not one of them can tell you why it feels the way it feels to stand beneath it, in the coloured light, and look up. So maybe the question worth carrying out of that chapel is not whether St. Joseph built the stairs. Maybe it is the harder one. The one this whole story leaves ringing in the air long after you leave. How many other things have we called miracles, only because history forgot the name of the human being who made them?